Hey, good afternoon. Really excited to be here. So everyone has heard about AI. It's kind of all over the place. And everyone has heard about how AI is affecting jobs and how AI is affecting creativity. We, at my company, we work a lot in the visual world. So we've built algorithms that are the most accurate at understanding what is in photos and also at understanding what is beautiful, what is commercially viable, and which kind of content will actually affect and speak to which kind of people. Just going to try to turn this on. But I'm not talking about that today. What I want to talk about is a bit of a more sort of a stream of consciousness, stream of thought about what AI actually is affecting, how life will change, how our damn it, no slides. Okay, how life will change, how our quality of life will change, how work will change, and how we will adapt in this sort of next generation of humanity. This was a New York Times article. The title was March of the Machine Makes Idle Hands, and it was about 1 million people descending on Washington to protest automation and the destruction of jobs. This article appeared in 1926, so nothing is really new under the sun. US President once said that the biggest threat to humanity is automation. That was JFK in 1960. So we kind of look at these things and think that this is something new that we're experiencing today, but it's stuff that has been going around for a while. And unfortunately, the hype kind of messes things up because it masks reality and just sells stories. This might have seen this. If some of you might have seen this at least. It's an article. I think it was on The Verge, talking about how Facebook had an AI that invented a language, and the language, the AI started talking to one another, and they had to go and shut it down, And they want you to think that Skynet is coming. They want you to think that they've created robots, whereas all that happened was an algorithm that didn't work out, that didn't do what it was supposed to do, and they just pulled the plug and rewrote it. And of course, it's not just tech, right? Politicians are getting involved. Putin just last year said that the country that wins AI will rule the world, to which Elon Musk replied, it has begun. And if you want to listen to all these people, if you want to listen to the press and so on, you kind of think that this is the reality that we're living in. You think that robots are coming to take over, and this is kind of an HBO show in the making. But if you go away a little bit from all of that noise, away from the sexy stories that sell ads, there are more acute and more real problems that are happening right now. So where there's smoke, there's fire, right? And what is happening is, in the last 10 years or so, a couple of things came together that allowed us to start building much smarter, much faster algorithms. The algorithms existed and the techniques existed for decades now, but we didn't have the computer power to actually build these algorithms. That changed with the cloud, that changed with much faster, much cheaper GPUs, and we didn't have the data. That changed with the internet. So now you have the data, you have the GPUs, you have the algorithms, and you can start building these things. And a lot of different aspects of our lives have been improved by AI, right? There's a lot of these algorithms that have been built. If you look at vision, where Google's algorithms already beat humans back in 2015, if you look at lip reading, same thing. Microsoft is LipNet can actually lip read significantly better than people, and the same with speech recognition with Microsoft and Alexa and Google Home and so on. So these are very, very specific things that machines are not doing much better than humans. But there's a reality of what AI is not, right? AI is not sentient. AI doesn't think. It's not Skynet, regardless of what everyone tells you. All of the techniques that we're using today are basically statistics. It's just not sexy to say you have a stochastic gradient with backpropagation. You have to say it's AI, and that kind of sells. Right? So the other thing, obviously, it's not anthropomorphic. Pretty much every one of us has interacted with AI a bunch of times today. It's small algorithms that improve tiny bits of your life, but that's about it. Third thing is, it's obviously not better than humans. Again, the techniques we're using are all based on data that is gathered from humans, more or less. So at best, it can be consistently as good as the best human, but not better. And finally, there's no such thing as AI. Like I said, it's actually statistics, it's algorithms, it's math. Roy Amara is a futurist and an author who coined this law, which said that we tend to overestimate the effects of technology in the short term and underestimate them in the long run. And I think that's the truth, right? We are actually right now underestimating in the short term. We talk about AI and robots taking over and so on, but the reality is the short term, the next couple of decades, are the ones where AI is making the biggest impact and where the way we live, the fundamentals of our way of life are going to change. Starting maybe a little bit with jobs, right? There's tons of reports about this, but generally it's kind of agreed that around 47% of all jobs are going to be lost in the next couple of decades. I'm going to walk you through a bunch of examples here, but some reports, and again, do you see how people agree on it? Thomas Frey is quite pessimistic and believes that 1 billion jobs will be lost by 2022. Other people think the same amount of jobs that gets created will also get destroyed. And there is really no historical context, I think, to the kind of change that we're going through today. I think it's quite disingenuous to say, a factory worker who lost his job can be trained to do something else, because there are no jobs being created. In the last, I think, 10 years, 15 years, around 0.5% of the workforce is actually employed in technologies that were developed in that time frame. So there are no jobs being created to replace the jobs that were lost. And that's also because this is pretty much affecting everything. Even today, something like 30% of all the tasks and around 60% of all jobs can be automated. So there's a bit of an inflation going on, and this won't get better. If you look at kind of the structure of how you would break up jobs, there's sort of the physical and the cognitive, routine and non-routine, and how you can sort of put things in there is truck driving, as an example, is a physical routine job, whereas cooking at a restaurant is a physical non-routine job. And in every single one of these, there are dozens of examples of AIs that are already replacing it. In Japan, there's a robot called Pepper, developed by SoftBank, that actually now operates 140 cell phone stores. Otto, which is an Uber company, regardless of what happens with them in their lawsuit, they already have trucks that are driving without humans, making deliveries over long distances. And this is just going to get productionized in the next couple of years. The first AI pharmacist will be operational in, what is it now, 7 years? Diagnoses are already being done better by machines than by humans. And they are, in some cases, augmenting the human that is responsible for this. For example, in radiology, there's this story of AIs that are making mediocre average radiologists into an actual experts. But in general, diagnosis is now being done by machines and at a much more accurate rate than humans. Whether we trust them or not is a different story. Same thing with cancer drug discovery. Actually, a friend of mine in Hungary has managed to build technology that speeds up cancer drug development by around 40%. It usually takes around 12 years to get a cancer drug onto the market. The first 4 years of those have been completely automated. With transportation, we don't even need to talk about this, right? 10 million jobs at the very least will be lost in the US alone due to self-driving cars and the impact on things like parking spaces and insurance and so on and so forth. AI is going into more creative things, designing furniture, designing cars, designing everything that typically you'd think humans would be doing. Lawyers, bankers, investors aren't safe. In the financial industry, around 40% of all basic analyst jobs will be lost in this decade already. There's already robot investors. I think Roberto is speaking right after me and talking about how they use AI to discover companies to invest in. This stuff is happening, and it's happening right now. But what I wanted to point out was one thing. Even without AI, the nature of work is changing significantly. The nature of work has been changing for quite some time. They call it alternative work arrangements, which is kind of PC for you're useless and we won't give you health insurance. But in the US alone, if you look at these jobs that are kind of considered basic, like farming and forestry and fishing, community services and so on, full-time jobs are lost already. So even without the machines, the kind of work that you do and the kind of stability that you had a few decades ago, that doesn't exist anymore. Even in the creative space, where we're kind of active, there's algorithms that you don't need to be a Photoshop expert anymore. You have a photo that you like, you have a photo that you took, and you just connect it to the photo that you like now looks. The photo that you took now looks like the photo that you like. You don't need to do any work. Same with removing backgrounds and sort of editing photos in a way. AI does it for you. Same with removing watermarks. If you're a photographer and you think your photos are safe because they're watermarked, AI does it for you. This is a completely artificially generated photo by or painting by a friend called Mario Klingemann, who's a Google artist in residence in Paris. He's been using artificial neural networks to actually create art, right? Another one, and that's kind of, there's always the question of, is this art or isn't it? Is it is it subjective or not? If you teach a machine to recreate the Mona Lisa, is that still art, or is that just a recreation? I think it's quite subjective, but you cannot deny that this is art. Another one by Greg Dunn, which is already on sale. So these guys are artists that use totally different tools. Monet used the brushes. Jackson Pollock would just spray paint on the canvases. Cartier-Bresson would use this camera, and these guys use AI to create their art. I'm going to try to read this because it's kind of funny. He was a shirtless man in the back of his mind, and I let out a curse as he leaned over to kiss me on the shoulder. He wanted to strangle me, considering the beautiful boy I'd become wearing his boxers. It's not Shakespeare, but it's also created by a machine. A friend of mine did this basically in his basement. He trained a little algorithm on romance novels, connected it to photos, and this is the kind of stuff that comes out. Restaurant reviews, the same thing. This is probably a bit more eloquent than your typical Yelp reviewer, but someone reading this wouldn't guess that a machine gave that restaurant review. This is kind of what we do. And so what we do is we actually look at a brand's photo identity, at their Instagram, their whatever they share content on. We take a few of their photos, a very limited data set of, say, 20 photos, and then we can train an AI in real time, without human intervention, to understand what their brand identity is. What kind of content converts, what kind of content is their language, which is, in this case, quite minimalistic. And then we can actually train this AI in real time and index 100 million photos within seconds, and then give them results that will perform. So this is kind of the job of a photo editor, and it's kind of the job of a creative director, at least partly automated. Let's wait for it to... Is the video running? Ah, there you go. Ranked 100 million photos in 4 seconds. Cool, but maybe moving away from things that we've seen before and things that we kind of, some of you might have seen and heard of, to something that's a little crazier. A bunch of researchers in Japan developed neural networks that can actually read your thoughts. So they connect to your brainwaves, and they would be able to translate the stuff that you're seeing into images. This doesn't look like much, but this is research work, and it's not production. Same with letters. They actually had subjects think of a letter, and the network would actually visualize the letter they're thinking of. So your thoughts aren't free anymore. Machines are actually reading your thoughts.
It's been less than a week.
Same with videos and faking things.
It's been less than a week.
A little snippet of Obama talking. Kind of miss him. Now you can actually play the audio and mimic the facial reactions and the facial movements on a bunch of different videos. You can't hear it, but basically anything he's saying or anything anyone else is saying, same with this guy. The guy on the top left is moving George Bush's face. So reality has changed. The kind of content that you see, you can no longer trust if it's real or not. And it's kind of a scary future. But which brings us a little bit to the topic of, what does this impact things like freedom and democracy? In China, they're rolling out the system. With 13 terabytes of data, they can actually visually recognize every single person with a Chinese identity card. Every single person. Wherever you go, they know who you are, and they know all of the data about you. That's kind of insane. This is research out of Cambridge, where they managed to build algorithms that can detect your face in around 73% of the cases, 70% of the cases. They can detect your face even if you're wearing a mask, wearing a hat. So the idea of protesting and not being recognized out the window. So the whole topic of privacy is quite a big one already, and with AI, forget about it. The topic of bias is quite an interesting one as well, right? Algorithmic bias is something that a lot of people talk about. I don't think there's really such a thing as algorithmic bias. It's a matter of terminology. I think the problem is more that we are biased ourselves. And I know that from me personally, when I was applying for my work permit in Germany, the lady who was doing that told me, you can get a work permit, but you're not allowed to sell groceries or import-export cars, because I come from Lebanon, and that's kind of her expectation of someone that comes from that part of the world would be doing. Right? And the machines take that data, learn from it, and they mimic it. Right? Sometimes they might overfit, meaning if they've only seen photos of women in kitchens, they would assume if there's a person in the kitchen, it's a woman. And if they haven't seen photos of black people, they would tag them as gorillas. Right? This sounds really nasty, but it's not the machine being racist or being biased. It's the machine not having seen enough data, or it's the machine actually reflecting realities of the world we live in. But bias is a really, really big topic, I think. And this brings to the sort of question of regulation, right? How can we take these problems and solve them? Unfortunately, there are no real ways, in my mind, to regulate. The bureaucrats have tried. GDPR coming up, it's a good attempt, but it has so many flaws. In Germany, they recently published this report on self-driving cars, and they had a set of rules about what self-driving cars should and should not do. Things like if you have the choice between hitting an inanimate object and hitting a person, then hit the inanimate object. Fair enough. Hit a tree, don't hit a person. If it's a person or an animal, hit the animal. I wouldn't like that, because then I'd rather hit the Nazi walking down the street than hit my dog, who I love, right? Or if it's between two people, then you also can't be biased. You cannot decide on age, skin color, and so on. But again, me as a person, I would probably not hit my girlfriend. I would hit the stranger. Just saying, unless I'm not really doing well with my girlfriend, but that's a different story. The sci-fi writers tried to also create the 3 rules of AI, right? And we know how well that ended with iRobot. So these attempts are kind of very simplistic attempts to describe a problem that we can't really understand. Same with the privacy crowd, saying we need to control everything, we need full transparency. Good luck doing that in a capitalistic society. And the billionaires, Elon Musk with his initiatives, Bill Gates, and so on. Again, same problem, right? They have ulterior motives in some cases, so how much can you trust? So the question is, can you actually regulate this? The way I see it, complex regulation does really need, complex technologies really need complex regulations. And then it becomes a question of, what if we don't understand the regulation anymore? And how do we balance our need to understand the laws that govern us with our need to actually have laws that are up to date, right? And this is Moore's law in action, because technology is developing so quickly that you can create a law today and an algorithm tomorrow will make that obsolete. It's a pretty big problem, right? Pablo Picasso famously said, anything you can imagine is real. And that's kind of the exciting times we live in. Pablo Picasso also walked around with an empty gun and shot people that he thought were boring. So I don't know how much we can take what he says to heart, but I do think there's some really fundamental questions we need to ask. First one being, will democracy survive in the age of AI? Again, like I said, complex regulation is something that is a really, really big topic. And I think democracy will not survive in the way that we know it today. Maybe that's a bad thing, maybe it's not, right? I mean, the famous saying is that democracy is the worst form of government apart from all the others. Maybe this will lead to something better for the future. The other thing is, you could stop innovation, you could freeze innovation, but do we really want to do that? How anti-human is it to actually say, we don't want to innovate anymore because we're afraid? Democracy will be impacted. What does it mean to be human in the age of AI? I think it's an even bigger question. So one thing I really noticed when it comes to researchers is researchers tend to say humans and not people, which I think is kind of terrifying, that we've started to make this distinction as if machines are also a different kind of people, just different evolutionary paths that led to the same point. But it brings us to that point of, what is it? What does it mean to actually be human? And I think there's a lot of things that are being redefined today. We've always associated efficiency with work, right? But efficiency is not about creativity. Our creativity as human beings is not a function of time per se, right? So do we stay creative? Is it still creativity what we're doing? Is it efficiency? Are we just working? Are we robots? Which leads us to the second point. And there's this term called Protestant work ethic, which I think is very, very interesting. The notion is, and it comes from the Bible originally, the notion is that you work hard and you'll be rewarded, right? And that's kind of the 50s view of you're a man and you have 3 kids and a wife at home, and you go to work in the morning, you come back at home, and because you work, you can afford a house and a car, and you will have at some point your retirement, and so on and so forth. And you tend to start associating your value, your purpose, with your job. And that foundation, I think, is fundamentally being shaken today because there's a decoupling, a fundamental decoupling of work from sustenance. You no longer work to sustain yourself because you can't control the work environment. And every single job is being affected. So where does this leave us? Where do we go from here? I think that's a really fundamental question. The interesting thing, though, is the one thing machines will never be better at is being imperfect. And that's something that is a fundamental human trait, which I think is quite an interesting thought, right? We're curious, we're irrational, and we're imperfect. And these are the kind of things that we need to leverage. They might sound partially negative, at least. Maybe the hipsters will rule the world. Maybe a machine will go like, there's no point in making IPAs and, I don't know, deep frying organic kale in beer batter, and people will do that because the rest of it is taken care of. I hope you didn't come here for answers. I really don't have any answers, and I've struggled with this myself for the longest time. What I do know is a couple of things. One is we need a new language to talk about these problems. We tend to use terms that we don't understand. The biggest one being artificial intelligence. We can't even define human intelligence, so why do we call it artificial intelligence? Maybe we can accept that a calculator is intelligent. It has artificial intelligence. It's smarter than us at addition and subtraction and so on and so forth. But it's not wise. Maybe we need to look at it as artificial wisdom is sort of the sentient big picture, which is the ability to look at these different verticals of expertise, being able to calculate and being able to recognize what's in a photo and being able to predict what you'll click on next. And jumping from one to the next, that artificial wisdom, that is the sort of the bigger term. Same goes about bias. We try to frame these things in words that we can understand to make life simpler for us now. And I think we're doing ourselves a huge disfavor because we're turning a blind eye to the future. The other thing is we need to come down, at least us as technologists, we need to come down from our ivory towers. We tend to sort of turn a blind eye to the people that are being affected by this because they're numbers, they're statistics. What if every time a self-driving car company had a strategy meeting, they would actually invite, say, taxi drivers, loop them in? We tend to have this, we tend to basically, by ignoring these people, we tend to actually increase the problems as opposed to alleviating. People can adapt. We're the most adaptable species, that's why we're still here. But in order to adapt, we have to actually understand. The way I see it, the Kuznets curve says that inequality, I'm paraphrasing, inequality will have to increase in society for a while before it actually decreases again. And I think we're seeing that today. The last couple of years have been years that we've seen a lot of talk about populism, a lot of talk about changing governmental systems and changing views of the populace. And I do think that a lot of that is driven by technology. A lot of that is driven by the fact that people have lost their purpose, are questioning their purpose, and are questioning whether they will be there and they will be able to sustain themselves and their families for the next couple of decades. And I think there's no answer to this. The way I see it, unfortunately, there's a bit of a dystopic future that is, or there's a bit of it's a dystopia in the beginning, a utopia down the road, but the next generation or so is one that will struggle. I don't think it's honest or I think it's quite disingenuous to tell someone who's a taxi driver, you can retrain and become a neural net programmer. It's not the case. We need to take on these problems, and I think the next generation or so will, like I said, struggle with this heavily. Beyond that, though, I think we're looking at a very, very bright future. there's nothing more exciting, especially for people like us, I think. There's nothing more exciting than being able to do what you love, right? And that's kind of always been the undercurrent of being an entrepreneur. You're doing what you love and the passion and the hustle and all that. Imagine you don't have to worry about sustenance anymore. You don't have to worry about surviving. It could be the birth of a new renaissance, and hopefully we'll survive until then, and we'll be part of that renaissance. But if not, I'm pretty sure the next generation will be. Thank you very much.